It's Dave from the Not So Ancient Chinese Secret Show, and today we're finally taking a quick review look at the Sony A7 III full-frame mirrorless camera. And here is the review in one sentence. If you can get past the poor ergonomics, the confusing menus, the frame rate dependent autofocus and zoom features, really quirky, the A7 III is a huge value for a full frame mirrorless 4K camera for video shooters. And we're gonna take a video-centric look, but it is 2 thumbs up, highly recommended. After the short review, I'm also gonna be sharing some of my favorite accessories that I've picked up that don't have to be expensive, but add to the value that you get out of this camera. So again, we're taking a look at the A7 III mainly for video use. And I'm familiar with the Panasonic GH5, GH5S, as well as my Nikon kit. And this is the first time I've gotten into a full frame mirrorless camera, and I've been using it for over 6 months now, so kind of know the ins and outs of it pretty well. The first thing that I love about it is the image quality. In low light, in all light, it's just wonderful. I'm sure the A7S Mark III, when it does come out later this month, I hope, will give it a run for its money as far as low light is concerned, but this is amazing. Pretty much if you can see it, you can shoot it. Now it does get grainy the higher the ISO you go, but totally usable 6400 ISO and even above if you don't mind some noise. Another thing going for the A7 III is that it does have full frame 4K. Unlike, for example, the Canon R series that just came out, and it crops quite a bit to get 4K footage. I should note that it taps out at about 30 frames per second, but really good quality 4K footage at 24 frames per second. Another pro going for the Sony A7 III is it's got very good in-body stabilization. So the sensor itself is stabilized with or without lenses that are stabilized. Now it's not quite as good as the class-leading Panasonic GH5, but it's pretty darn close. And it's gonna be interesting to see when Panasonic launches the S series later this year, whether or not they can actually push such a great stabilization into a full-frame sensor. But one thing that the Sony does better than the GH5 is 120 frames per second slow motion in the full HD 1080p mode. When you shot 120p with the GH5, there was no audio recorded and it'd just be the slow frames. The Sony, however, shoots 120 frames per second with the audio. So you can capture 120 frames per second without losing your audio, which is a big deal. Now, hold that thought because you might be thinking, Dave, why don't I just shoot 120 frames per second all the time? As we'll see in the cons section, there's a few limitations that aren't really laid out anywhere online that I could find that make you not want to shoot in 120 frames per second all the time. Before we get there though, another pro for the Sony A7 III is it's got a lot of programmable, customizable buttons on it. If you're interested in how I set up my buttons for video shooting, then hit me up in the comments and I might make a video about that in the future. Another great thing about the A7 III is just the price. When it was first announced, people couldn't believe that they were selling this thing for $2,000 for the body only, in US dollars of course. But that is an incredibly good value for a full frame mirrorless camera that set the bar really high for all the manufacturers. And one last thing that I love about the A7 III is a really usable 1.5 times digital zoom option. I'm usually a guy who doesn't like to use any digital zoom whatsoever and only rely on optical zooms. Whether it's your phone or with your old Handycam, whenever you digitally zoom in, it often creates a lot of artifacts. But this is different. This actually has a very usable 1.5 times digital zoom that smoothly zooms in and out as well. And of course, this is above and beyond the fact that you can crop into the sensor as well. Now, there's not a lot of control to that digital zoom, so you can't control the speed of the zoom in and out. But when you use the crop factor along with the digital zoom, it gives you a lot more framing options for your lenses. Now let's get to the cons list. And I know this is nitpicking, but one thing that I'm very disappointed in are the built-in microphones. I'm thinking, Dave, that's like the least of my problems. Everybody uses an external mic. Well, when I shot with my Nikons, I actually often never used an external mic. And I would use that microphone for the B-roll mic or just environmental microphone. Now you're thinking, Dave, you're just nitpicking. But the problem is, like, Sony is known for making great quality microphones, and I own several of them as well. So why couldn't they make better directional microphones right into the camera? I mean, it could have been an easy choice. Another thing that was really disappointing to me on this camera was that there's no eye track autofocus in video mode. I heard a lot of talk about this at the release party, and everybody was saying, oh, eye track autofocus is so awesome. What they fail to tell you is that there is no eye track autofocus in video mode, at least I don't know how. If I'm mistaken, I'd love to know what I'm doing wrong, so please enlighten me in the comments. I raved about its slow mode that you can capture 120 frames per second in 1080p with no problem and with audio. The problem is whenever you switch into 120 frames per second slow-mo mode, there are a lot of downsides. First, you have a limited and awkward central autofocus follow option, and you also have no digital zoom. That option is blocked off when you're in 120 frame per second mode. Another thing that I'm not mad about is the ergonomics of the body itself. This is a brick of a body, and even for my small hands, it feels just awkward in my hand. So I'm pretty sure if you've got bigger hands than mine, you're gonna wanna get the grip, but then that adds a more bulk, and so the promise of smaller mirrorless cameras is a failure right there. I should say my Nikon bodies feel great in hand, and the upcoming Panasonic S models, those also feel amazing. So there's really no excuse for them to not make a better camera body that you would want to hold. This being said, I think that ergonomics for shooting up to your face are more important for still shooters, because I often find myself shooting down low where it's less of a problem, and with big lenses like the G Master that I have on it, I will hold my camera a little bit differently than if I was to put it up to my face. For many of my corporate shoots, what I'm doing is shooting video and then I'm pulling stills from them so they can use those and share those on their Instagram feeds and for thumbnails. What I'm finding is that the lower video bit rates available on the Sony make for more compressed stills that have lesser quality to them. I'm usually still shooting at full HD, which is 1080p, not 4K. And what I found is that for the best still quality, here's a tip, is gonna be found at the 120 frames per second. And it's because they have a little bit higher bit rate for that. And I'm not sure why the 60 frames per second, I find that they're a little bit softer and there's more JPEG artifacts when I'm pulling the stills from the video. Another con to the A7 III is the very confusing and non-intuitive menu system. Spoiler alert, I'm a geek and I love reading manuals, but their menu system is messed up. The problem is they're not separating the video functions and the still functions, and they're kind of overlapped in several different categories. So it makes for a very confusing way to navigate the menus and set up the camera the way you want it to. Another thing to consider when you're purchasing the Sony A7 III is the lens prices of the native glass. I mentioned what a great value the body is for the A7 III for a 4K full frame mirrorless camera. But you have to factor in the price of the G Master lenses that they have. This 24-70 f2.8 G Master lens costs more than the body. And yes, you can get adapters that can get your old lenses onto the body, but I found through testing at the camera store as well that the native glass from Sony focuses better and more reliably in video mode. So if you're switching over from a different camera system like me, then definitely make sure that you factor in the cost of the glass that you'll need to buy. The last two cons are pretty minor. One is that it's got a 30-minute record limit, but at least the 30-minute record limit is consistent across all formats, whether you're shooting 4K or if you're also shooting 120 frames per second in full HD, it's all gonna be limited to 30 minutes. The last con, I haven't experienced an overheating issue, but I have heard reports others have. Two things might be in my favor. One, I live in Canada and it's cold here, so the environmental temperatures aren't gonna be so hot for my camera. And the second thing is, I mostly shoot in full HD and not 4K, where the sensor is going to generate a lot more heat and thus be more prone to overheating. Now I mentioned in the very beginning that this would be a video-centric review of the A7 III. And you might think, Dave, but you're a photographer too. What about the stills? Well, I'm a little bit shy to use this on stills because the first time that I did bring this to a paying gig, it failed me. I have no idea what happened, but I was shooting in RAW format. There was a catastrophic failure where I could not fix it without formatting the card. Now to be fair, I've never encountered this issue when recording video on this guy and it's been very reliable. But as a working professional, this was not a good scenario to find myself in at a paying gig. And so the camera was locked up, nothing I could do, even taking the battery out, putting it back in, that same SD card, it just would not play nice at all. Maybe it's just an isolated incident and I'm just a lucky one, but that kind of scared me off from taking this as my only still shooter. Now we get onto some of the fun parts, my recommended accessories. And the first accessory is gonna be the lens you put in front of this beast. And my do-all lens is this bad boy. It is the 24-70 f2.8 G Master from Sony. Now this thing is a beast, and it also has a very stiff zoom ring, which makes it really hard to zoom without moving your camera even when it's locked down on a tripod. But this is the most beautiful 24-70 f2.8 lens that I have ever used. And I have used the Canon version, L-glass of course, as well as a Nikon version. And this one has a beautiful bokeh, as well as just great control over the feel of it as well. That being said, it is a beast. It is big on this camera, and it makes it very front heavy as well. So when you do carry it for video, at least, I do find myself needing to support the lens where, the one-handing this is possible, but you're gonna get a lot of camera shake after a little bit of time and in this position. With this one zoom lens, and with that trick I mentioned about using the crop factor, as well as the digital zoom, 1.3 digital zoom, you can do a lot with this one lens. And I did purchase other lenses, longer lenses, but I find that this stays on the camera body because of its versatility. Now the second item kind of goes along with this, and instead of getting a macro lens that's dedicated to taking close-up shots, I buy extension tubes. And these things are amazingly, one, inexpensive, and two, can fit on any lens that you buy. What's cool about them is the fact that there's no optical glass in them at all, so it doesn't degrade the quality of your image. What they do is change the minimum focus distance so you can get way closer to your subject. I should note that when you're using this extension tube, and this is the 10mm that I keep with me all the time, with this lens, the 24-70 f2.8, when you're shooting wide at 24, it's pretty much unusable. You're getting way too close, right? You can't use that. But when you zoom into about the 50 range, then it gives you a really nice range for food photography, for just getting a different perspective. And so that's my easy, relatively cheap trick to get macro lenses out of every lens. Another accessory that I love and I put on every video camera that I own are these little tiny mic covers. Like, I already complained about the audio, but I always record audio on my body so that I can sync up later on, and in a pinch, I can get some ambient noise as well. And before I found mic covers, I actually hacked my own version of them with some double-sided tape, as well as different furry things that I found around the house. These little mic covers are way easier. They're not perfect and they won't get rid of all the wind noise that you have, but it gives you a fighting chance to get usable audio in the great outdoors. Another accessory that I do recommend is putting a screen protector on the LCD. I've been using my iPhone X without a screen protector for over a year now, and I love it. But the LCD on my cameras, I'm a lot more abusive when they're laying by my side, and I worry about scratching them against my belt, against buckles and things like that. And I found that the glass ones, the tempered glass that I have linked here, is doing a pretty decent job without affecting the touch too much. And if you want to get really low shots, one thing that I recommend is a simple top handle. And this one is a very nice rubberized ones, but there's other ones where you can add more features and different holes that you can mount a whole bunch of stuff on. But this one's nice because you can just put it into the hot shoe, lock it down, and now it's really simple for you to get those down low shots and have another point of carry. Another benefit is the fact that this one allows you to just grab it from the center point, and the camera's way more balanced than grabbing it from this point here. And because it is balanced, it keeps a pretty good level when you're shooting like this as well. In the link below, I also have a couple of suggestions if you need to get AC power. There's one that I love and use, and the dummy battery also fits along with the case relay from Tether Tools that lets you infinitely power this via USB bricks. So really useful if you're on the go and needing infinite power. So let's wrap things up. The Sony A7 III is far from perfect, but it offers a lot of bang for the buck. Even with new competition from the Canon R, the Nikon Z series, and the Panasonic S, it's hard to beat the value found in this little beast. As a former Canon shooter and a current Nikon still shooter, I'm still glad to report I have no regrets on purchasing my Sony A7 III kit. Definitely recommended even for shooters of other systems like me. So before I let you go, I do have a thought of the day that I wanted to share, and it's this. Make a clean break with all cutting, backbiting, profane talk. Be gentle with one another, sensitive. Forgive one another as quickly and thoroughly as God in Christ forgave you. Life goals for me. As always, links, notes, and updates will be in the description, and if you've got any great accessories or any updates for the Sony A7 III review that you think I've overlooked, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. So thanks again, God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.